Are there any particular challenges in clinical trial design for studying treatments for PAH?
There's a lot of interest in this disease state, so there are a lot of new therapies that we are investigating. And as I mentioned earlier, PAH itself is a rare disease. So deploying patients to these clinical trials can sometimes be difficult when you have a lot of competing trials to do. And so when I look at my own clinical trial portfolio, I'm really trying to pick drugs that I think will have a major impact on new therapy. And so drugs similar to CS1, which are now working on the remodeling of the vessels, are really the drugs that I'm putting in the forefront of my clinical investigation portfolio.
What are the key elements in an optimized PAH trial design?
The best designs, particularly in the early phase of development of the drugs, are designs that will really allow accurate clinical phenotyping of the patients. We want to know the characteristics of these patients that might make a drug suitable for them or not suitable for them. And so phenotyping them using different modalities, the right heart, for example, MRI, echocardiography, the lung, CardioMEMS, or new imaging portfolios like FRI or Xenon MRI, really tell us a lot about the underlying substrate of a patient. And knowing that, we can really test the efficacy of drugs in these different clinical phenotypes.
Can you elaborate on the optimal choice of primary and secondary trial endpoints and how this has evolved over the last 5 to 10 years?
The evolution of these endpoints really mirror the interest and the interest of the disease, both in clinical investigators and regulators. In the very early beginnings of pulmonary hypertension, when we didn't have therapies, we were looking at endpoints that really allowed us to gauge a person's improvement in functional capacity. So 6-minute walk test was really the primary endpoint for many of our early trials in pulmonary hypertension. But as our understanding of the disease has evolved, we understand that one variable really doesn't depict how a patient will do over a long period of time. And so we went from using a 6-minute walk test to more hard endpoints, actually mortality and clinical worsening. Now the problem with that is it told us exactly what a drug's going to do with a patient, but it took a lot of people to do this, a lot of patients, and the trials were very, very long and expensive. And in a rare disease state like pulmonary hypertension, which progresses so rapidly, we want drugs to come to the market with a little bit more speed. And so now endpoints are evolving now to look at multimodality risk calculators like REVEAL 2.0, REVEAL Lite, or even COMPARA 2.0. All these scores take into account multiple variables that we know alter prognosis in pulmonary hypertension. And by using them together, we paint a much better picture of outcome with our patients. Now, the key thing for these calculators is they already show us how a patient functions and how a patient survives. But the question is, do these calculators tell us how a person feels? So that do they correlate with quality of life? And I think some of the early studies we've done with quality of life surveys like Emphasis 10 suggest that they really do correlate with quality of life. So as a REVEAL score goes up, depicting worse prognosis, quality of life goes down. And the same thing in the reverse direction. So I think these risk scores are becoming very appealing for new strategies and primary endpoints in upcoming clinical trials. And we're actually testing them as key secondary endpoints in trials that we're doing right now.
Is the 6-minute walk test still relevant as a primary endpoint?
In my opinion, I think the 6-minute walk test has done us really well in the past, but I think its time has passed. And using it together with other variables that we know are important in these comprehensive risk calculators, I think is where its new place will serve.
Do you see trial endpoints evolving further as treatments develop?
when you design an endpoint, you really have to design it around what you think a drug is going to do for a specific patient. So I do think there will be a continued evolution of endpoints in this disease state. Right now, as I mentioned, we're really looking at these risk calculators as potential endpoints. But there could be others. There could be other modalities like cardiac MRI, which really gives us an accurate depiction of how the right heart responds to pulmonary hypertension. So perhaps imaging could be a very important primary endpoint in the future. I'm not sure about that yet. We have to do more studies. And then we also have novel imaging capabilities of the lung. I mentioned one earlier, functional reserve imaging, which is a modified CAT scan in which we can accurately depict very small caliber blood vessels and see if these blood vessels are disappearing or reappearing with therapy. So that could be a potential disease-modifying endpoint because we're actually imaging the disease. The same thing for other imaging modalities like xenon MRI, in which we can actually depict the alveolar capillary interspace, which is where this disease really is. It's in the small arterioles. And we can determine whether these arterioles are remodeling and coming back with this very sophisticated technology. So I think technology is evolving, and so will our endpoints.
What would be an ideal primary endpoint?
Ideal really varies between whether you talk to a clinical investigator or to a regulator. So for the regulators, it's very clear what they want. They want endpoints that match with disease modification. An endpoint has to measure how a person functions, how they feel, and how they survive. And your endpoint has to hit all three of those to be something that, for example, the FDA might approve as an endpoint for a new drug. And so we're in constant engagement with the FDA and EMA regarding endpoints that we feel match those criteria, and whether that is a disease-modifying imaging modality, a pressure measuring modality like the CardioMEMS, or a multifunctional risk calculator like Reveal or Reveal Lite 2. Those are things that are hotly debated right now, and more to come on those.
In a trial, how might you evaluate whether a treatment has disease-modifying effects?
To determine if something is disease-modifying, you really have to look at how the disease progresses, propagates, and how it kills people. And so as I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of new technology that we can do to do that. So I think using combinations of multi-parameter risk scores, which really tell us how a patient functions and survives, and then combining it with new technology that can image the small vessels in the lung, or can tell us the pressures in the lungs or the output of the heart on a frequent basis. The combination of those might make a very ideal combined primary endpoint.
Traditionally, pH therapies have been evaluated in trials versus placebo. Do you think future studies would be more likely to be head-to-head drug therapy studies?
The time for doing placebo trials in treatment-naive patients is gone, because we have effective therapy, and we know that delaying the initiation of effective therapy hurts people. So I think in naive populations, we will never have a true placebo trial. Now, we could have placebo trials in people on established medical therapy. So if we test a new drug on top of that, sure, I think we can do placebo-regulated studies. But in naive patients where they won't have the opportunity to receive any therapy, I think those days are gone.
For more episodes of our Insight series, please follow Cereno Scientific on LinkedIn or our YouTube channel.